Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. Congratulations, Angela, great presentation. She's our newly elected Measurement Commission Director starting in 2024, so we're very excited about that. All right, so I'm going to talk to you about a topic that's really important to the work that we do, and that is disinformation. So we have done annual studies on disinformation for several years. We try to launch it every year. And so we just published the fourth one. We also did one in Canada as well. So I also have to acknowledge fellow trustee Dave Schultz of Leger. Raise your hand, Dave. So Dave, yay, big applause for Dave, big applause. Okay, so Dave runs, now you're leading the New York office for Leger, and he and IPR partnered this year on this project, which is really great. And we also partnered on the project in Canada. They do really great work, and they're very easy to work with, so they're an excellent partner, so I hope they will continue partnering with IPR on the fifth Disinformation in Society report. So just to sort of get us all on the same page of what disinformation and misinformation is we define disinformation as deliberately false or misleading information. So that means that the actor sending the disinformation is sending it with the intent of deception versus misinformation, which is you're sending out information that may not be correct, but it could be an accident. So we are really looking at disinformation. And those numbers are inverted. It's at a survey of 2,200. It's actually 2002. All right, so this was an online survey that we did in July to August of this year, and we surveyed 2,002 Americans over the age of 18 using the panels that Leger has. And they have, they follow along with POR, like a lot of the rigorous standards of research. So what we do, the first thing we do is we sort of level set and find out how significant disinformation is to individuals. But we don't want to prime them, so we give them a list of other issues that are major issues in society. And we also don't ask them specifically about disinformation and misinformation because people have different definitions of what that means. So instead, we ask questions about deliberately false or misleading information in the media. And then we translate it into disinformation or misinformation. So if you see the little arrows pointing down and the green arrow pointing up, that's what the numbers were last year. PP means percentage points. So for example, if you look at misinformation, it has -8 PP, and it's at 61% this year. It means that last year it was at 69%. So 69 minus 61 is 8 percentage points, which is different than percentage. So, and this sort of gives you an idea of what we saw last year. Now, the one item that we did add was inflation because that was a major topic. And you can see that, as you would expect, that is the major issue, that 73% of our 2002 respondents said it is a major issue in society. Disinformation and misinformation also saw a decrease, but we may see an increase next year with the election. So no one's ready for that. All right, so you can also see where it falls in line with a lot. Healthcare costs, usually year after year, are the top one, and then inflation took over that role. So regardless, you see that disinformation and misinformation are both major issues by the majority of Americans in our survey. And also, if you have questions along the way, don't hesitate to raise your hand and interrupt me. It won't bother me. All right, so then we also asked a series of questions about what is the impact of disinformation on society. So first, you can see that the numbers range from 61% that disinformation infringes on human rights. And by the way, we collapsed these. They were strongly agree, and then we just bucketed the strongly agree and agree together. And then we asked questions about the election process, threat to democracy, and the polarization of political parties. Now, this sample represents the population of the US. It's not skewed toward Democrats. It's not skewed toward Republicans. It represents the population of the US. So because of that, when you see numbers that are typically in 3/4, it means that both sides come together and believe it's an issue. When you see numbers under that, and if you look at differences, which is typically where we find the majority of differences politically, then you know that this is probably a divisive issue. But as you can see, that the majority, 3/4 of respondents believe it does undermine the election process. Okay, and then we also asked a series of questions. The one that are have asterisk means that we added them this year. So this one I find particularly interesting, that 14% of respondents have knowingly shared disinformation. And I know that that's not like the majority, but I just found this very interesting that fewer than that, like 1 in 7 people have knowingly shared disinformation. It's not good. Not good. We also wanted to ask about artificial intelligence because when we ran this, people have been using ChatGPT for about 8 months. And you can see that over half said that it will create more disinformation in society, and that we saw more people saying that concerns about disinformation are exaggerated, but it's still not terribly high. And people do worry about accidentally sharing disinformation. Some don't, and that 3/4 believe it is commonplace in society. And last, that what is also interesting, and we've seen this go down for the past couple years, is that encountering disinformation for nearly 50% believe it does make them anxious or stressed. Okay, so we asked this. One thing we do different than maybe some others is we really just drill down into media types. So we don't ask questions about newspapers or media. We really are very specific. And I think you have to be, just my experience doing this survey year over year, that you can't ask people questions about how do you feel about business? How do you feel about media? Because it depends on where you are in your organization, what your perception of life is. So I'll give you an example. And I'll get into this, we ask questions like Fox News, The Washington Post, New York Times, CBS News, PBS News. We try to list all the mainstream media sources, and then we ask them questions about their perceptions of trust within those sources. We also ask questions not just about business, we say major companies and corporations, federal agencies, your employer, people like you, people not like you, your friends, your family. So we give a laundry list that's very extensive, because I think sometimes when I see surveys and they bucket into business, media, you really have to differentiate between these because there's a difference. Every year we've done this study, family and friends are at the top of the most trusted sources. 75% of respondents said that they have some or a lot of trust in their family or friends as for providing accurate news and information, which people find shocking, but year over year, and I think probably post-Thanksgiving, if anyone had interesting family time, that you're probably like, that cannot be the case. But I tell you it is. So, and it's funny, I was watching something and they were talking about disinformation and they were like, your uncle, does everyone have an uncle that goes to Thanksgiving and ruins it? Okay, yes, apparently yes. And then we added the military this year. But the one point that's really important to make is that we saw some declines in local news, but of all the media sources, local broadcast and local journalism, so newspapers, typically score high in the most trusted sources. And the reason why is because both political parties typically come together on that source. The reason why NBC News and some of the other are not as high is because while Democrats may think it's high, like very trusted, Republicans do not. And Republicans typically, where their trusted source is more Fox News, but they don't find mainstream media as trustworthy. And this is why you have to differentiate between the media sources, because they are not all created equal. Yes, question, David Grossman.
Am I reading this right, that my employer did not end up on the top sources of the trust?
Heck no.
So I'm correct that it's
You're
not
correct.
on there. So I'm curious what you make of that. It's surprising to me.
Okay, so I will tell you, we ask about your employer, we ask about companies and business, and this is consistent. Dave and I have found this year over year, and even in the Canadian study, is that that's usually not a large source. Usually that number's around maybe 40%. And we also don't find business to be the most trustworthy source. Consistently year over year, it's not business. Yes, Dave.
Yeah, and we also ran it in South America, and it's consistent there as well, across the board.
Perfect. But let's break it down into here's why. Here's why you cannot just say they're all created equal. And these are the gaps in the specific. So when your CEO is like, please get me on that NBC News, right? You have a very large swath of the population who doesn't find that to be a very trustworthy source. I don't know, they don't say get me on the NBC News, but you know what I mean. But you can see the big gaps and differences. So when you have the smaller gaps, like the Wall Street Journal, 22 percentage points, that's where it's a little more narrow. Now, here's where local news, but that's not a specific source, but local news, like these gaps, the 20 percentage points and 25 percentage points, are not terrible. And Dr. Penelope Abernathy from UNC does a really great study on news deserts. And you know, since 2005, we've lost 2,500 local newspapers, or they become ghost newspapers, and that's where people come together on trusted sources. You know, there's some great, Laura Duda, calling her out. She is on the board for Signal Akron in Ohio, and they are focused on, it's a gift from, was it the Knight Foundation? And they're focused on like local journalism, making sure you're getting people to those meetings and they know what's going on, and getting people in the community is part of it. I know Axios is focusing on local, so there's a lot of local programs that are trying to bring back and make local journalism stronger. Okay, so we also ask about who's responsible, that should be somewhat responsible for sharing disinformation. And I'm gonna run through this because I think I have 10 minutes left. We have Facebook, politicians, Chinese government. These are all very not surprising. But if you look at public relations professionals, 61% of respondents said PR professionals are somewhat responsible for spreading disinformation. Major companies, corporations, 61%. Those are high. All right. The social media platforms, Facebook, TikTok, X, not surprising, are the most. Then I pulled out the marketers and advertisers, PR professionals, and major companies were top 3 sources considered at least somewhat culpable for spreading disinformation in business. And then you can see here the news sources. It's typically media, right? That's journalists, 65%, Fox, CNN, on and on. And we can send this out at the end because we published this a couple weeks ago. All right, so here's the ones who should be responsible for combating disinformation. Year over year, it's the president. When Trump was president, it was also Trump that had an expectation. And US government, the government is primarily responsible. Then it goes to journalists, are typically the people. And people even say that they themselves are responsible for combating disinformation, but they also say when we ask them how well they're doing, people believe they're doing very well themselves, so it's a good sign. So here's, yes, that are combating disinformation well. These are the top sources. Local news, fact-checking websites. The Supreme Court also pops up in responsibility, so there you go. All right, but here's something that's very important, is that when you look at the gaps between who is responsible for combating and how well people perceive they are doing, there are significant gaps. So for example, if you look at the US government, 62% of respondents said they are very responsible for combating disinformation. But then when you ask how well they are doing, only 35% say they are doing so at least somewhat well. Those are not really good grades, for sure. And then where you have people who say that they're very responsible, but they're doing pretty well, fact-checking websites, local news. Like those are the ones. And then it goes up here like radio news, and then you go up tier to network news. But it's typically the government and the government who is not doing as well in the perception of the audiences. Oops, I'm getting excited. Whoa, slow down. Hold on. There we go. All right, so we asked them, we also level check, like, how often do you think you come across disinformation? But we didn't, this is how we actually worded it here, that you believe misrepresents reality or is false. And we have 40% who believe they do every day or almost every day, and then at least once a week. So if you look at this, nearly 3/4 of people believe they come across disinformation at least once a week. And then when we ask people if they go to other sources to check for information before they share it, 37% said that they sometimes do, and 20% said they often do. And we think that a lot of time that maybe the third person effect would probably be at play here, that people do think they're doing a really good job at checking sources before they share it. But this is always higher than I expect it to be. And then we said, how confident are you to identify disinformation? Like over half are somewhat confident. But then you have like 1 in 5 who say, you know what, I don't think I do a very good job at all. But here's also something very telling, and that is, do people do they change their media consumption based on what they anticipate would be? Are you leaving, Jerry? Are you mad at my presentation? It is false information. See, Orest is here. He's still here. All right. So this is my last slide. That's what happens if I do this, is I get to call people out. Here it is. 40% of people say they avoid watching, reading, or listening to the news because of the amount of disinformation. And then we ask them, how likely are you to read sources outside of the US? I mean, then you have like 1/3 of people, or neither agree nor disagree, or even like 60% who are kind of neutral about it. But 1 in 3 are going to other sources outside of the US because what they believe is to be disinformation. So those are the questions. Well, this says your questions, not my questions. And that's our survey. And we do, we're happy to talk about this with any teams, because we do give some suggestions when we have more time for what companies can do to help combat it. So that will be part 2. That's not today.